Okay, so let's go ahead and start with an introductory video into the integumentary system. So starting off, the integumentary system is anything from your skin, which you'll hear to as integument. That includes your epidermis, dermis, etc., and your accessory tissues such as your nails, hair, sweat glands, sebaceous glands, sensory receptors. The integumentary system includes the largest organ in the body, aka your integument, which is your epidermis and dermis, and that's about 7 to 8% of your body weight. So what are the functions of the integument? Starting off, we have the protection. So with protection, it forms a chemical, mechanical, and physical barrier. For example, protecting from UV radiation, it helps prevent from pathogens from entering your body, except if you have a cut or something like that. It also helps keep water in or keep it from coming in. So keep it from entering or exiting the body because water regulation is important. The next is your metabolic regulation. So metabolic regulation includes making vitamin D3. It also helps with that because that vitamin D3 is a steroid precursor that helps increase calcium levels, and you'll talk about that more in the skeletal system. It helps with secretion and absorption, so it can help with like a body temperature from sweat. So if you sweat, it helps cool the body. It also secretes sebum, which helps lubricate the skin and then makes it more water resistant. And then it also helps with sensory reception. So you have touch receptors. You can feel when someone touches you or a mosquito lands on you, things like that. Cold, pressure, vibrations. All right, so starting off with the layers, you have the epidermis and the dermis, those first two layers. Those are the actual layers that make up the integument. The hypodermis, or what you may see as the subcutaneous layer, that is not actually part of the integumentary system, but it plays a vital role, so we talk about it in this unit. So let's start with the epidermis. So the epidermis has 5 different layers within it, but the main thing is it is keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, and you'll see that in the lab. So the keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. So starting off with the very top layer, so we're going superficial to deep here, is you have your stratum corneum. So that's the superficial layer, and that's about 20 to 30 layers of dead keratinocytes. The stratum lucidum is that second layer. It is only found in thick skin, so only in thick skin, which is in your palms, palm of your hands, the palmar surface, and then the plantar surface of your foot. Those are 2 to 3 layers of dead keratinocytes. Again, thick skin only. So in thin skin, you really only have 4 layers of the epidermis, not 5. The stratum granulosum, this is your 3 to 5 layers of barely living keratinocytes that fill up with keratin. So I'll explain more of the process of how we get cells from the migration from bottom up in a minute, but let's just define each layer. The stratum spinosum, that's several layers of living keratinocytes attached by desmosomes, so a lot of desmosomes in that region. Then your stratum basal, which is the only, excuse that typo there, layer that it goes through mitosis. So a way to remember/memorize these is a saying that we came up with. It's called "Come, let's get sunburned." So the C for corneum, let's lucidum, get granulosum, sunburned is that spinosum, but we also have that burn in there for basal. So the way cells actually migrate though is from bottom up. So we start at the stratum basal and we have cells going through mitosis. Those keratinocytes are dividing, multiplying. Once they do that, they move up to the stratum spinosum. So they start moving up. That's where they're living keratinocytes. And then after that, they move up even more. Once they hit the granulosum, that's where we like to call the graveyard. That's where they start to be injected with keratin, and that causes them to die. So they're barely living. They're in the process of dying. Once you're in stratum lucidum or corneum, those keratinocytes are dead. That's why we have the dead keratinocytes. And that whole process for a cell to migrate up takes about 2 weeks. And then once it's at stratum corneum, it stays there for about another 2 weeks. So our life expectancy for these cells are about 4 weeks total. So right here, migration from stratum basal to corneum takes 2 weeks. They stay in stratum corneum for 2 weeks. So again, 4 weeks total. And then within the stratum basal on top of the keratinocytes, we have our melanocytes, which produce melanin and tactile cells. That's it for the epidermis. That's the layers of the epidermis. Within the dermis is made up of areolar and dense irregular connective tissue, and we're going to break that down. Next slide. Take that back. We have thick versus thin skin first. The dermis will probably be on video. So thick versus thin skin. So we talked about thick skin having that extra stratum lucidum, and that is on the palms of your hands and the soles of your feet. whereas thin skin covers the rest of your body. So it's not the palms of the hands or soles of the feet, it's thin skin. The thick skin has all 5 epidermal layers. The thin skin has no stratum lucidum. And then the thick skin has sweat glands, but not hair. So think about, do you have hair growing on your feet, on the bottom of your feet or the palm of your hands? No, but thin skin, you do have those sweat glands and hair follicles and sebaceous glands. So with that, remember, thick skin has sweat glands, but no hair, no sebaceous glands. Thin skin has sweat glands and hair follicles and sebaceous glands. And then next, the thick skin is 0.4 to 0.6 millimeters thick, and thin skin is 0.075 to 0.15 millimeters thick. And I would memorize that. All right, so let's talk about skin color. How do we get these certain colored tones, I think, things like that. So first one we have is hemoglobin. That gives us the red tint. So with hemoglobin, that's the oxygen binding protein in your RBCs, your red blood cells. And then that's what gives you the red tint because your blood vessels in the dermis. You have a lot of blood vessels highly vascularized there in the dermis. And so we get the red tint from that. And there's a picture of some RBCs. The next one is your keratin, and that's your yellow-orange color tones. That's a pigment acquired from vegetables, mainly those yellow-orange vegetables. So kids who eat a lot of yellow to orange vegetables can actually start turning orange. It accumulates in your keratinocytes in the stratum corneum and subcutaneous fat. With this is also your source of vitamin A, and vitamin A helps with vision, night vision, things like that. There's your carrot. And then lastly, melanin. This one's the most important one on here in terms of it has other functions besides just pigmentation. They're produced by melanocytes, and it can be any tone. It can be black, brown, tan, yellow, brown shades, all kinds of shades. It's transferred into the keratinocytes and the stratum basal, so we inject the melanin in there, and that's what protects it from UV radiation. The melanin surrounds that nucleus and protects it. That's really important. All people have this, on average, have the same number of melanocytes, but the activity and color that those melanocytes produce varies. And then there's the different shades. All right, moving on to skin markings. So we have 4 different skin markings to talk about. The first one we're going to talk about is the nevus or navis, however you want to say it. And that's just a fancy word for a mole. And with the mole, we actually have an overgrowth of melanocytes. So in a region, we say we have 1 melanocyte normally, but let's just say we have 6 melanocytes all grouped together. You're increasing the actual number of melanocytes in a region. And they can become malignant with too much UV exposure. We'll talk about how to look at moles at the end of this unit. But again, a mole, nevus, fancy word, overgrowth of melanocytes. The next one we have are freckles. So freckles are not an actual overgrowth of melanocytes themselves, but it's one melanocyte producing more melanin. So it's an increased melanocyte activity, increase in the activity of 1 or 2 cells. And so we have those splotches or freckles everywhere. Next is that capillary hemangioma, and that's just AKA a birthmark. I'll show a picture on the next slide, but it's present at birth and normally disappears in childhood. It's basically a blood vessel tumor, but it's benign, meaning normally not malignant. So it's not those cancerous tumors you normally think of when you hear tumor. And then lastly are friction ridges. These are like your fingerprints. They're found on your fingers, your palms, soles, and toes. And each individual has their own unique pattern. So the fingerprints are unique to each person. And it helps increase friction on contact. So grabbing papers, things like that, you can use the friction ridges. And then here's some pictures. So the first one on the left, that is a nevus, which is a mole. The one in the middle, bottom left middle, that's your freckles. The top middle, that is your capillary hemangioma. And then the very right is your friction ridges. And we're going to stop this video here before we move on to the dermis.